Hi there, everybody, and welcome. This is Jeff Delto of Convergence Training and Vector Solution, and we have a really special guest today. I'm very excited. So we have Dr. Will Thalheimer. Will is the owner of Work Learning Research and writes at the Will at Work blog. Also has some great stuff, some books out. If you probably already know Will on your own, and know that Will's a big name. Hi, Will. If you're familiar, if you follow the Convergence Training blog, you know that we've interviewed Will multiple times. We are constantly referring to him and his work on any number of topics. So obviously we're excited to have Will. And Will, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. It's Friday here.
Hey, Friday here too. Imagine that. Same side of the international date line. Well, thanks again for coming on. And today we're going to talk about training or learning evaluation. We're going to have two interviews, actually. This will be the first one, and we're kind of looking at some common models, and then we'll come back and have a second one on a model you just created called LTEM. But I wonder, just to kind of set the scene, Will, if you could just let people know what we're talking about when we're talking about training evaluation.
Sure. And you know, Jeff, you sent me a whole bunch of questions that you might ask me. And so what I did, I took the liberty of creating some visuals, some slides, because sometimes a picture paints 1,000 words. So if you'll allow me to jump in there.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Get started. And I'm gonna start really from, looking at some big picture ideas, because learning evaluation, well, first of all, learning is really complicated, right? Much more complicated than the hard sciences like rocket science, because human beings are so complicated. And then you put the layer of learning evaluation on that, and it becomes even more complex. So I want to go over some big picture things first, just so that we are all on the same page.
No, that'd be great, please.
Let's try this out.
All right, cool. Okay, I see your screen.
Do you see my whole screen or just?
I see your whole screen, not just one PowerPoint slide. There we go. Bingo.
Okay, great. Hopefully none of my secrets are there. I'm sure people will be like sponging that up. Okay, so look, one of the things that people have told me, that I've seen out there, is like a lot of our learning evaluation experts are telling us that learning evaluation is really hard and we're not doing it very well. But also we as learning practitioners sort of believe the same thing. Here's some research I did with the e-Learning Guild just last year. And when we asked people, in general, are you able to do the learning measurement you want to do? You can see 52% of them, 52%, over half, said, no, I wish we could substantially change what we're doing now. So we as practitioners have this unease about learning evaluation. By the way, I'm going to have a bunch of links for you, and Jeff's going to post those nearby. So don't worry about capturing all these or stopping the video or anything like that. We're going to give them to you all later. But this research study is available at the e-Learning Guild. If you're a member, you can get the executive summary if you're not. One of the things that I focused on is some of the common mistakes that we make. And last year, I thought I would capture maybe 15 to 20 of these, but I came up with 54. So, yeah, absolutely. You can see that there's some problems out there. And again, I share those with you. You can take a look. One of the things we ought to realize is that when we're talking about training, right, that's just part of the performance ecosystem. There's all other kind of factors that get involved there. And sometimes we want to evaluate those, sometimes we don't. But it's good to keep that in mind. Because there's been so many confusions in learning measurement, I created this sort of three-part, I don't even want to call it a model, but 3 ways to measure learning, and people find it really helpful, so I'll share it with you. We can measure learning to demonstrate the value of the learning. We can do it to support our learners in learning, and we can also improve the learning as well. Now, when I ask, I've done some research with this, did some research with the e-Learning Guild a long time ago, but also when I continue to ask and work with clients, when I ask learning practitioners, what does your organization want from you? Put these in order, it almost always goes like this. First thing we want, our organization wants us to demonstrate the value, then support learners, and only down at the bottom do we focus on improving the learning?
Mm.
Now, my thing is that this is the most important. This is where we can leverage things. Because if we're not improving the learning, we're not going to maximize the way we can support learners. We're not going to maximize their learning, and we're certainly not going to maximize the value that we can create. So improving the learning is the linchpin of all of this.
Yeah, it sounds like a little parable of a cart and a horse there.
Exactly. I like that. Yeah. So there we are, good-looking learning professionals. Some of us are not quite as well coiffed as these folks, but anyway. So when we think about data and analysis, we need to collect data that's accurate, valid, relevant, highly predictive of what we care about, what's important, that's also cost-effective. This is something we sometimes forget about, but we don't want our evaluations to cost so much that it hurts the overall cost benefit. The most important thing, though, is when we do our learning evaluation, we want that data to help us make our most important decisions. And I'm sure you all have your own thoughts on what our most important decisions are, but here's some of the things that I consider some of our most important decisions. Is the learning method or methods we're using working, or should we use another one? Is the skill content we're teaching useful enough to teach? Are we doing enough to give learners support in applying the learning? Are we sufficiently motivating our learners to inspire them to act, to take the learning and actually implement it on the job, overcome the obstacles with implementing the learning, et cetera? And then, is training useful, or should we provide other or additional supports? We know that training doesn't work in a vacuum, and so are there other supports we can make? So there's some things like this that are crucial to our performance as learning professionals. If we can use our learning evaluation to get feedback on these, we ought to do that. A couple of other things. One of the things to think about in learning evaluation is the inputs and the outputs. So we've got learning interventions, right? Whether it's classroom training, whether it's people learning in the workflow, hands-on, or whether it's e-learning, doesn't matter, we can evaluate it. When we evaluate the outputs, what are the results? We can also evaluate the inputs. So the outputs look like things we've seen before, right? Smile sheets, the learner perceptions, learner knowledge, what have they understood? Are they able to make decisions? Are they able to remember? Can they perform on the job? And are they sharing what they've learned as well? There can be many types of outputs. These are the effects of our learning interventions. But we can also evaluate the inputs. So one of the things we can do is research benchmarks. So we could look at our learning designs. And I do this a lot in my consulting work. So people come to me and say, Will, we're not sure about our learning designs. We want to make them better. Can you do a learning audit for us? So I compare it to some research benchmarks, some best practices. I use the Decisive Dozen, but there's other things people can use. So we can also look at our designs, our analysis, our assumptions, and look at and get information about our learning as well by looking at the inputs as well as the outputs. Now, most people, when we think about learning evaluation, are thinking about the output side. Now, that's perfectly legitimate. I just want to emphasize here that sometimes we can look at the inputs as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share here. And what's your next question, Jeff?
So I think great intro. Our next question that we talked about was just discussing some of the more commonly used training evaluation methods. And I wonder if you could tell us a couple of the most common ones, and then we'll, once we have them kind of on the map, we'll drill down and talk about each one. Sure.
Well, of course, the most common, the most well-known is the Kirkpatrick 4-level model. And it's been the dominant model in our field for a long time. There's also other models. People talk about the Phillips model, the ROI, Kaufman, Roger Kaufman's work, and Rob Brinkerhoff's work as well through the success case methodology. Those are the big four. Of course, I'm a little biased. I would add L10, the new model that I worked on as well.
All right, great. And again, for everybody listening, we are going to talk briefly about LTEM near the end of this one discussion, and then we'll have an entire detailed discussion on LTEM in a second one. So uh, hold on for that. And okay, Will, kind of if we can just walk through each of the four models you talked about, Kirkpatrick, Phillips, Kaufman, and Brinkerhoff, and maybe you can just explain to people, especially people who may not have heard of any of these, what they are. And what are some pros and cons of each? And I'll interrupt you after Kirkpatrick, after the first one, just to get a little interesting background that I know you've done some research on as well.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the picture paints 1,000 words.
Yep.
So this is a picture of Donald Kirkpatrick, and most of you know the Kirkpatrick model. It's level 1 reaction. These are sort of the learner feelings about it. Level 2 is learning. Level 3 is the behavior of the learners when they get back to their workplace and start implementing and applying what they've learned. And level 4 is the results that they get from that behavior. Okay, so fairly straightforward. Now, I think I'm going to anticipate one of your questions.
Okay, fair enough.
So I have now started calling this the Kirkpatrick-Cassell 4-level model because, as it turns out, Raymond Cassell is really the originator of the 4-level idea. And we're going to give you this link later, and if you're interested in that, you can read an article that I wrote, sort of a little piece of investigative journalism, if you will, and it talks about Cassell's role in creating a model. So that being said, that's the 4-level model. Now, one of the things I talk about in my work is how to evaluate a model, right? Models are good if they help us, right? So I talk about the messaging that the models send. Really, you could think of this in terms of sort of the behavioral economics notion of nudging. What does the model push us to do? And models push us in good ways and bad ways. Well, the Kirkpatrick model is the same as all models. It has some beneficial messages. So the most important thing that it does, it tells us that we shouldn't just focus on learning, that we should focus on results too. And this is really, our whole field over the last, like starting 30, 40 years ago, began to move from a focus on the classroom to a focus on performance. And the Kirkpatrick model was aligned with that result. The other really beneficial message that it sends is that learner opinions, learner surveys are not that important. So they put those down at level 1. And that's important to know because too often we default to those. By the way, in the report that goes along with the LTEM model, I go into a lot more beneficial messages and harmful messages of the Kirkpatrick model. But here's just highlighting a few of the top ones.
Hey, Will,
So
before you get started on harmful messages, just to give a plug, while level 1, the surveys, the evaluation surveys and smile sheets are the least important, I do want to mention that Will has written a great book to help you get more value out of that. So keep your eyes open for that. And apologies for the interruption.
No worries. Well, and actually, let me point out that, even though Will has written a book on smile sheets, Will has also noticed he's saying that these are not the most important things. So, okay. So one of the things that's harmful, the 4-level model does not warn us against ineffective evaluation practices. If I asked you what you think the most common way that we evaluate learning is, you're going to tell me it's smile sheets, but that's not actually correct. The most common way is that we measure we measure attendance or completions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Kirkpatrick model doesn't warn us against those, and I think a good model should warn us against things that we should not do, not just things we should do. The Kirkpatrick 4-level model also ignores the role of remembering. So we, as designers of learning, we want to support people in being able to learn, but we also want to support them in being able to remember. And from a learning design perspective, those are two different things. So from a learning evaluation perspective, those things should be taken into account separately as well. And probably the biggest problem with the Kirkpatrick model is that it puts all types of learning measurement into the level 2 bucket. They're all mashed together. So we can measure things like trivia, the regurgitation of trivia, that could be in level 2. It could be the recall of meaningless information, or the recall of meaningful information, or it could be the ability to make decisions, or the ability to actually perform a task. All these things are related to learning, but because we put those all in one bucket, sometimes that means that we just sort of default, oh, you know what, we need a level 2. Oh, okay, let's do a knowledge check. And that really creates a lot of problems. It gives us bad information when we evaluate, but it also pushes us as learning designers into creating learning that's not really that effective. So some beneficial messages, some harmful messages.
Could I ask you a couple questions on the right-hand column there?
Sure, absolutely.
Could you tease out what you're talking about ignoring the role of remembering?
Okay. So we can teach somebody something, but if they forget it within a couple days, then we haven't really done our job, or we haven't done our job well enough, because most of the time people need to remember what they've learned over at least a little bit of time. Even if you teach like 20 things, right? Teach 20 things on a Monday. How many people are going to use all those 20 things on Tuesday? Well, not many. Probably, maybe they'll use 5 things on Tuesday, 5 more things on Wednesday, and then, the rest of the week, maybe a few things. But you can see some of those 20 things are not going to be needed for a week or more, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So remembering is really critical.
So what would be your response to somebody who said, like, but that's implicit in the level 3 evaluation on the job, observations of on-the-job behavior, which presumably would account for some of that memory, right?
Well, so we have to be careful here, though. Someone can, let's say you try to measure behavior on the job,
mm-hmm.
and let's say they fail. Well, why did they fail?
Okay.
One of the most important things is they might have failed because they forgot. They could have failed for other reasons as well, but if we're not measuring remembering, then then that causal chain is broken. We don't know what went wrong.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool, thanks. And then level 2, learning is mashed up. How much of that problem could be solved by simply having better level 2 assessments instead of reciting trivia, like you said?
Well, so obviously it could,
okay.
But it doesn't.
Fair enough.
Let's be practical. What I'm saying is, because we've had this model that has level 2 as one big thing, we have not been pushed. We have not been nudged. We have not been sent the message that there's better learning measurements to do.
Right. Good. Okay.
And we're going to see this in LTEM, because I basically designed LTEM to be a response to the weaknesses of these other models.
Right. Cool. Thank you very much.
No worries. Anytime. So, so just so you don't think that I'm the only one saying, being critical of the Kirkpatrick itself 4-level model, this is a scientific review in a top-tier scientific journal, and they evaluated the Kirkpatrick framework, and they said this: it has a number of theoretical and practical shortcomings. It is antithetical to nearly 40 years of research on human learning, leads to a checklist approach to evaluation, and by ignoring the actual purpose for evaluation, risks providing no information of value to stakeholders. So that's pretty damning.
Yeah.
That's not the only one. This was just published this year. Kirkpatrick's framework is not grounded in theory, and the assumptions of the model have been repeatedly disproven over the past 25 years. And they showed a number of research reviews of that, and that was published by Tracy Sitzman and Weinhardt. So.
All right, welcome back.
Thank you. So let me sort of summarize. So the Kirkpatrick framework has been our dominant model for a long time. It's got some good benefits. It's got some things that are not as useful as they could be. It, in all fairness, it was designed back in the 1950s. This is before the cognitive revolution in psychology, before we really compiled a lot of the most important research on learning. So you wouldn't expect that it would be integrated with sort of that science of learning stuff. And so now we have an opportunity to go beyond the Kirkpatrick model.
All right, great. Okay, and you're right. You did anticipate my question about the interesting history of Kirkpatrick. I'll include some additional links for people who want to go down that rabbit hole. And maybe could you turn your attention to the second model? I think we decided we were going to talk about the Phillips ROI model now.
Sure. Okay. So Phillips model basically takes the Kirkpatrick 4-level model and adds ROI onto the end of it. And I'm going to go into ROI, but it means return on investment, just like you would learn in business school. And we'll get into that. But I just want to emphasize that even though Jack is known for the ROI model, he does a lot of evaluations, most often with his wife, Patty. They do great work. They're out there evaluating all the time. They're not just teaching workshops. They do a lot of great stuff. So this is what the ROI methodology looks like. And I'm just giving you the high points. But here's how you do it. So based on the training, what have you done differently, if anything? These are the questions you ask of learners who've gone through a training. Based on the training, in what ways has the organization benefited? Based on your accomplishments, which enabled by the training, what is the monetary value of the to the organization? And make sure you explain the basis, so they're really pushing them. What percentage of the improvement was due to the training, from 0 to 100? What confidence do you have in your estimate? Again, 0 to 100. And then what was the investment in training an appropriate investment? And then the calculation is very simple, right? You take the benefits and the costs. But what Jack really adds to this is that you can see in 4 and 5, you're really getting a way to be very conservative about your estimate. So, you might estimate, that you save the organization $100,000. Well, what percentage of the improvement due to training? Well, maybe 50%. So you can see that's going to cut it down to, $50,000. And then what confidence do you have? And that's, again, going to cut it down. So the benefit side of the equation, the top part of the equation, is a very conservative estimate.
So,
Okay.
Will, real quickly, just to clarify something and maybe anticipate something you might say soon. These are questions asked of the learner, is that correct?
That is.
All right. Okay. I'll come back to that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, so the strengths of the model are that it's framed in terms that some of our organizational stakeholders, some of our business stakeholders really care about: ROI, return on investment. It's also, one of the strengths of it is it takes a very conservative estimate. Now, on the weakness side, you can see that this is the subjective input of the learners. And learners may not be very good at estimating, how much benefits there were. Sometimes they can, but it depends on the type of learning. The way I see ROI is that there are times when we have particular type of stakeholders where this is going to be very important, but probably don't want to do this as the only thing we're doing.
So you just, I think I anticipated. I think you made the point, but just to underline it, I mean, how often do you really think a learner could put some kind of ROI estimate and do that in an accurate sense? What are your personal feelings about that?
Well, there's some areas that's easier than others. So if you're a salesperson, right, and you take a sales training on a new product or on an old product, and you see your sales increase, well, you probably have a pretty clear idea about that. Now, something like leadership training, I used to be a leadership trainer, right? You ask, well, how much did this improve your people's productivity, and how does that relate to their, how much money they're making for your organization? That's really kind of, not so easy to do. Now, even then, though, you could argue that, there's times when you have some stakeholders that this kind of thing is very important. We don't work in a vacuum. We're trying to do two things at once. We're trying to create excellence in learning and performance, but at the same time, we need to maintain our budget, not get fired, things like that. Even Jack says, you probably don't want to do this on that high percentage of your programs. I think he estimates 5% or something like that.
Okay.
So, there's some real times when it's valuable, and there's other times when it's less valuable or really not needed.
All right, great. Kaufman's our third model. Are you ready to talk about that?
Sure.
Cool.
I think.
I suspect you are.
All right, so there's Roger Kaufman. He has a 5-level model too, and he sort of based it on the Kirkpatrick one a little bit, but not too much. And by the way, he's working with some other folks. I'm not sure I know all the folks, but John Keller's one of them. Ryan Watkins. I know he's done work with Ingrid Guerra. But basically, he talks about level 1, but it's not just reaction. He wants to add stuff about the inputs, the learning supports, all the kind of organizational things. Roger's real focus he's got real two focuses. One is that this should not just be about learning. Remember I showed you the performance ecosystem before?
Mm-hmm.
And so when he talks level 2, it's not just about learning, it's about acquisition of learning and resources and everything you need to get your results. You can see that in application too. So it's not behavior based on learning, it's application. And that can be not just learning application, but all the other resources you're applying as well. Level 4 is results, because results are results. And then level 5, and this is one of Roger's great contributions to our field, is this, he calls it mega, but it's really the societal impact. The impact that goes beyond just our focus on our organizations.
You've written just sidetrack here, you've written a kind of interesting article about e-learning and global warming, haven't you, that maybe partly relates to that? Well,
yeah, I try to look at the big picture. So one of the big pictures is, if you learned about, and my wife just sent me this article yesterday to calculate how damaging flying is. But these planes, they go up into the stratosphere or somewhere up there, and they're spewing a lot of pollutants into there and causing global warming and things like that. So I just asked the question, what role, do we have an ethical? Should we look at our travel budgets and our traveling as part of a big picture ethical kind of concern? So, it's very interesting. I published that, and some people really liked it, but there was a lot of silence. Because I think it's hard for us. This is what we've been doing. But it does suggest to me that if we can create really good e-learning, that we should try to do that, not just because it's maybe can be well designed. In fact, some research I did a couple years ago showed that in the wild, if you just have a classroom training versus e-learning tends to be better designed because we just follow the old methods in the classroom. We lecture, basically. Doesn't have to be, both can be better designed, but so there's some opportunities there for e-learning that could help with the mega stuff that Roger talks about.
Yeah.
So,
right, cool.
I think the real, there's two really nice things about the Kaufman model. Number one, not just focused on learning, but thinking about the whole performance landscape. And number two, getting us to think beyond our really narrow focus that we've had over the years. And if there's any weaknesses in there, sometimes I get a little bit confused of, what's in each bucket. But, that could be just me.
It's interesting that the mega societal thing came up in this, I guess, idea of purpose. Are you familiar with Daniel Pink's book Drive and the theory that like autonomy, mastery, and purpose are key to our sense of motivation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that fits in nicely with that point.
Well, absolutely. One of the things that stunned me over the years is that none of our models really focus on the benefits and costs to the learner. It's like, it's kind of like we've treated them like automatons, like assets, as opposed to, you know, human beings.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Kaufman. So now we brought in societal issues. And then last but not least of our common methods is going to be Brinkerhoff.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to take you through a bunch of visuals here to describe the Brinkerhoff's case method. Now, he calls it the success case method, but and he and I have wrangled with this a little bit, because when and you'll see, he actually sort of does you're doing mini case studies, and you're taking success cases, but you're also taking failure cases, and then you're sort of evaluating. So that's why I like to call it the case method. But his argument is that, well, we really need to be positive so we can get people to pay attention to us, which is a good argument. But anyway, I think I've left a link with you, Jeff, that people can, if they want to go flesh that out, they can do that.
Yeah, I'll definitely include that. I read that today, actually, before you sent the link, and I like both points. I will admit that originally the name and the inclusion of success case method confused me in the way that I think you're referring to. It makes it sound like it's all about studying successes.
Right, right.
And I think his counter is basically, amongst other things, it's about creating more successes.
Right, right. Okay, so yeah, you can see sort of the skeptical researcher in me wanting to be fair and all that stuff. All right, so the case method starts with this sort of overall arching intent. Is the training being used? Right? When the training is used, what good does it do? And what would it take to get more value from the training? Okay, so that's a starting point. And then there's sort of a two-step process. And I'm oversimplifying here for time. But what we do first is we identify trainees that have been the most and least successful. And then we interview some of these. We don't want to interview all of them because that would be too costly. And going back to one of the goals of evaluation, not to make it too costly, we interview some of these folks to understand, analyze, and document their stories, their cases. And so basically, it's a two-part process. We survey first, and then we interview. And one of the nice things that Brinkerhoff talks about is the impact model. And you can see it's 5 points here: knowledge and skills, critical actions, key results, business unit goals, and company goals. And what I really like about this is that this is a really good way to communicate with our stakeholders. They get it. It's simple enough. It doesn't overwhelm. Very straightforward. And so then, you might think about, well, when you're developing this survey, how do you do it? Well, here's an example. So across the top row, we have our choices. And then we have our actions here. So I could have used the training to have more organized staff meetings or coaching sessions or ask for more input from my direct reports. This looks like for a leadership training, could be anything along there. And then you can decide, I tried this and achieved a worthwhile result. I tried this, but have not noticed any results. I tried this, but it did not work, or I have not tried this yet. And then you sort of have a map, if you will, of what people have done and their overall success. And then what you do from these surveys is you look at some of the people that were successful and some of the people that were least successful. So fairly straightforward there.
Great. So just a little bit, I'm going to ask you for a brief intro to LTEM. We just talked about 4 different training evaluation models. They're 4 of the most common used, biggest, well-known. Before we go into LTEM, are there others? And can you just maybe spit off some names if there are some? Or
yeah, there's a bunch of them. And I know there's one that people in Europe have told me that they really like, called Hamblin. Although I looked at it and it looked exactly like the Kirkpatrick model to me. Not exactly, but similar. Let me make a recommendation.
mm-hmm.
Dana Johnson at Red Thread Research did a really nice summarization
Okay.
of the evaluation models that are out there. And we can leave a link to that research out there.
Perfect.
Her overall assessment was, wow, really, except for LTEM, there really hasn't been that much change in the evaluation models in, decades and decades. So, but it's a really good summary. There's other models in there that I didn't go into. There's also models that are, that come from academia that are probably too complicated for most of us to use. And so there's other things going on as well.
Okay. So we're going to get back together and do a second discussion. We're going to talk about a model you created, I think about a year ago, called LTEM. I hear a lot about LTEM these days. I'm intrigued by it myself. And wonder if you could just kind of set the scene in this discussion for that future discussion, explain like why you created LTEM and kind of give us a general idea of what it's all about.
Sure. Well, I created LTEM because for years I've heard complaints about the dominant model, the 4-level model, right? And also I've seen that we don't really evaluate like we should. Look at that list, 54 common mistakes that we make. So clearly we're not doing what we could be doing. And it's not just me saying this, the learning professionals in the field all feel this sort of sense of depression and can't get stuff done, and we really are not doing what we want to be able to do. We know we should be doing more. Oh, so many people, every time I do a conference talk, people come up to me and say, hey, yeah, we'd like to do more, but the organization won't let us or whatever. So I set out to create a better model. And it's gone through like 12 iterations. I got some of the smartest people in the field to look at it, help me make improvements. It's now in sort of a steady state after 12 iterations. And, it's really based on the idea that our models ought to push us to do the right things and push us away from doing the wrong things. Simple as that. I call that messaging.
Yeah, or related to the behavioral economics nudge issue you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, if a model doesn't work for us, we should find a better model. Now you can't, when you evaluate a model, you can't expect perfection. You got to compare it to other things that are available to us, because models are simplifications of really complex stuff. So we need to create a model that's simple enough, but precise or accurate or valuable enough that it does us good or does us more good than other models are doing. So simple as that. So I'm just going to show people the model here and maybe say a few things about it. So the model on the left here, you can see it's a one-page model. It's got 8 tiers. You can see there's red at the bottom, and I know this is not worldwide, but I made red to be bad. So this is just measuring attendance. Not that these things are bad to measure, but that they can't validate our success in learning. They can't tell us that. And then there's sort of some middle levels here that are mediocre, and then there's some things that are better to do. And I'm going to go into all of that later. But basically, it's 8 tiers, and there's a 34-page report that goes along with that. We will put a link to the report if you want to read it before the next interview we do. And it's gotten a lot of success. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good business person, so I give it away for free, and I don't even collect people's email addresses, so I don't have a very good sense of what people are doing with it. People have told me what they're doing with it, but that's only sort of anecdotal evidence. So there's a whole bunch of people doing stuff with it now, thinking about it, thinking about ways to do it. When I wrote the 34-page report, I anticipated ways to use it, but now people are coming back and say, oh, well, we're using it this way, this way, this way. In fact, Matt Richter, my podcast partner, we just started a new podcast called Truth in Learning. He just wrote an article on 7 ways to use LTEM. He loves it. I think he loves it more than he likes me. But anyway, that's another story. So that's LTEM in a nutshell. I don't want to go in too much in depth because this is a teaser for our next interview.
Right. Good. I'm glad you mentioned Matt Richter's article about using LTEM. I was going to call that out as well. I guess two quick additional questions for you and before we sign off. We're
Sure.
talking about training evaluation. Do you have insight as to like how often people should be doing this?
How often?
Yeah, should I evaluate
Once every 5 years, I think we'll cover it.
Okay, fair enough.
No, I'm joking. Well, we should be evaluating all the time. You're giving me license to go off here. So,
Go ahead.
Well, okay. So, number one, we can think of evaluating a particular training course or a learning effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can also think about, getting better at that one, but we can also think about our whole system or our whole curriculum. We can think about evaluating those things as well. And then we can think about, for some of our our really high really strategically important learning programs, we probably ought to be piloting those before we roll them out. So we should evaluate those. And we want to evaluate, we tend in our organizations to have similar designs, right? So we don't need to drill down in every one of our learning programs and evaluate it to the nth degree. We may just need to pick out a few versions of it, evaluate those really crazily, and we're going to learn lessons learned from that. So, yeah, there's a lot in that answer. So I hope I gave you.
It's a good start, if nothing else. And then my second kind of question, a follow-up is, we're talking about learning evaluation and training evaluation. I hear people talk about it a ton, asking questions about it a ton. I also hear people talking a lot about learning analytics. I wonder if you could explain, same thing, different thing? What's the relationship here?
Well, so the connotation of learning analytics is that it's about data and data science and all that kind of stuff. XAPI people are using to gather more information. Still haven't quite nailed that yet because it's really hard. One of the things I mentioned in my measurement workshops is that sometimes we tend to measure what's easy to measure as opposed to what's important to measure, right? That's why we do smile sheets. That's why we measure attendance. Because those are easy to measure.
Yeah.
But, measuring things like, are we giving our learners enough realistic practice? That's much harder to measure. Or are people, do they feel inspired or motivated? That's much more difficult to measure. So, we have to watch out for those kind of things in general.
All right, great. I like that you mentioned measuring things that are easy. The last point I was going to make is, early in the discussion, you talked about the most common learning evaluation method being measuring course completion or attendance. You've got that at the bottom of LTEM. And since we are talking about behavioral economics a lot, I think that's a kind of classic Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast and slow. I'll go for the easy measurement that doesn't actually answer the question I'm trying to answer.
Right. So, I've actually seen a lot of problems with this focus on data analytics. I'll give you some examples. I was sitting in a room. This was in a major global consulting firm, big consulting firm. And I had just given my presentation on how to make better smile sheets. And then I was sitting in the back, and then their team was showing the new way that they were going to report on their data. And so they showed this new, very fancy dashboard with this great interface. I think it was developed in Tableau or whatever. And the leader of this group stood up in the back of the room and said, "This is great. This is exactly what we need. This is the new, this is." And I, because I'd talked with the team before, knew that the way they were getting their data was completely crappy. And that it was bad data, but it looked really good. So, there's that kind of issue. There's also, we can measure a lot of things with like XAPI now, but we tend to measure clicks, which is fine. We need to know what people are doing so we can make some things better, but we also need to measure the things that are important as well. So, yeah.
Cool. So open discussion there. I know that I saw you passing along a free link to a free textbook on statistics, which I think is a great place for people in L&D to start if they want to start, learning about crunching learning data. So I'm going to try to track down that link and include it at the end of this article.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, yeah.
All right, cool. So, Will, thank you a million. The slides are great, by the way. Thanks for putting so much work into this. You put more work into prepping for this than I did, so appreciate it. And for people out there, could you just let them know like how they can connect with you, follow you, any things you got going on? I know you got some online courses, any conference presentations, any podcasts we need to know about?
Sure. I put together a couple slides just in case you asked this.
Convenient. Thank you. Cool.
Yeah. I didn't really summarize what I'll do this summary and then I'll jump into that. But
perfect.
I really think we need a more muscular approach to evaluation. And I mean, one that's more effective, that really gets us better results, particularly to help us make those most important decisions and get the resources and support we need. I certainly don't have all the answers to this, but together we need to work on this. There's so many. I've studied this stuff in the learning evaluation, but I still feel like, feel there's so much more for me to learn. So I think, as a field, we need to do this because what we've been doing over the past decades has not worked very well. And now we're doing a little better, but there's still so much to get better at. Okay. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that I've just created this new course. It's an online self-study course. It's called Presentation Science, how to help your audience to engage, learn, remember, and act. I'm really thrilled about this. It's going great. The first people who have gone through it, one person said, this is the best online course I've ever taken, ever. So kind of thrilled with that. You can take a look at that at presentationscience.net. Here's a bunch of links, articles that I'm going to give you, Jeff, that you can post for people. They can take a look at these things. Talk about the Net Promoter Score, my updated smile sheet questions. There's this nice debate about the Kirkpatrick model that Clark Quinn and I had. A bunch of stuff there that people may be interested in. And then just to summarize, there's my contact information if people want to get in touch with me.
And what's the name of the smile sheet book for people?
Oh, it's Performance Focused Smile Sheets, a radical rethinking of a dangerous art form.
Cool. And a lot of the really super great white papers and research stuff, that's at the Will at Work blog. Is that correct?
Well, the blog has now been incorporated into Work Learning Research. So, okay. You can just go to worklearning.com.
And do I go there as well for the upcoming podcast?
Thanks for asking. The podcast, we have our own website. It's called Truth in Learning. I think it's .com. I think we got truthinlearning.com.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, it's out there if you follow my stuff. I think, if people are intrigued with what I'm doing, the best thing to do is to, actually, I think I have it here. Go to sign up for my newsletter because I really publish things there and I can remind people of, what's going on. So.
And I'll also let people know I call out that Will's active on Twitter and LinkedIn as well, and you can follow him there.
Yeah, I'm liking LinkedIn more and more.
All right, cool. Well, everybody out there, I'm sure you guys enjoyed that. Stay tuned. We'll be coming back to talk really in detail about LTEM shortly. And Will, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time, and look forward to round 2.
All right, my pleasure, Jeff. Thanks so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.